All right, today I want to talk about how to get textures onto our stuff. I've gone through a couple demos, obviously, of how to model different things, different shapes. Pretty much any shape I've ever done has been using those exact steps. Extruding things, inserting edge loops or knife tool, and then beveling things out. The next step is typically people find it the trickiest, which is getting materials and labels and stuff to fit on those containers. So we're going to start off with a simpler one, and then we'll get more complex as we go. So essentially I need to put a label on this bottle right here. And I say this is the simplest one because the label for this one has an exact spot it's going to fit in. It's going to fit right inside that area there. You can go further, but the more complex you get this, the more difficult it is to do this next step to get it to match and line up and everything. I'll also let you know that Cinema has a horrible way that we have to do this, but we'll use Cinemas because that's what we have. If you've ever looked at a cereal box or a Pepsi can or any of those types of things, you may have noticed that there's typically a label that wraps around these types of things. Those labels are printed on regular printers-ish. They're flattened out and then they get cut and then fit around there and glued or sealed somehow. So we basically have to do that exact step. We have to take our 3D item and then we have to create a flattened out label that would then wrap around it, okay? So you're going to create your labels from scratch. I'm just showing you what they will look like in the end. So for something like this, I have to see where it is that my label is actually going to go. It's going to go right here. So there's not a whole lot of wrapping around. It's literally just like a sticker that could just lay flat right inside that cavity. The first thing I'm going to do is turn off my subdivision surface. And I'm going to go to my cube. And I'm going to look at what this item looks like when it's flattened out. Okay. So I'm going to switch my layout up here to not startup. I'm going to switch it to BP UV edit. So this is what my item looks like when it's flattened out. Now that, when we model a cube or a cylinder or a sphere or anything, it starts off with these things called UVs, which are the texture coordinates. And basically it's trying to, as we go, flatten it out. And it does a horrible job, as you can see. And we have to manually go in and fix it so that it nicely wraps around. So this is what good UVs, whoops, let me go to a new folder. This is what typically good UVs would look like. So if I'm going to texture a character, I have to be concerned about UVs too. If I'm going to texture, I don't know what this specifically is, something mechanical, I need to lay out all the UVs. So every single piece and part and whatever else needs to be laid perfectly flat. Here's another one, there's another one, there's another one. Okay. Now for something like this product one, as long as we don't have an image being wrapped around the certain areas, we don't have to be concerned about it. So on this edge here, there's no image. It's just going to be a solid color. The only image is going to be right here in this area. Okay. So I'm going to lay this out so that I could tweak what that's going to look like. So I'm going to jump back to my standard or startup one, either one. I'm going to create a checkerboard texture. So I'm just going to go, oops, not there. I'm going to go to a new material. I'm going to go to color and choose checker under our surfaces, under checkerboard. And then on the checkerboard itself, I'm going to say, let's put this at 20 and 20. Okay, so if this is a checkerboard picture, every single one of those squares is perfectly square. As long as these two numbers are the same, it should be square. Oops, if I set this to 10 and 10, you'll see still those are square. I'm going to turn off reflectance also. When I look at this on my item, so I'll drop it onto cube, you'll see that none of those look square. Like, I think it'd be hard pressed to find one square inside this mess. But that doesn't matter. Okay. For this kind of texturing, all we need to do is make sure where we're going to put the label, it looks perfectly square, okay? So now that I have the UVs on there, I'm going to verify that this says UV mapping here. So I clicked on this circle, oops, just once, make sure it says UVW. And then I'm going to switch over to my BP UV edit. Before I do that, these things here are different ways that we can project something on there. So in past assignments, what we've done is we found a picture of wood and just found whichever one of these lays the wood out best. Here's spherical, here's cylinder, here's flat. Okay, looking at flat, hey, look at that. They're all square, right? So for this specific item, I probably could use or get away with using flat because it is just like straight on. But we want to take it the next step without doing that. Looking at the sides of this though, those are not square. Okay, so flat projects it from one direction, and then the other sides of it are just getting stretched out. And let's go to cubic. All right, cubic looks like a pretty decent one. There's squares like all over the place. Okay, now this works pretty good with a checkerboard because a checkerboard repeats itself. My label is not going to repeat itself. It's going to be like a one shot, like right in the middle type thing. So I'm going to set this back to UV. Typically you'll set this to that when you do this kind of thing. Go to UV edit, and then I have to come over here and relay this out. So more tabs, more windows, more buttons to click. So I'm going to go over here to projection. Make sure I'm in UV face mode. There we go. Make sure I click on the marquee here. Make sure I have only visible off. That way I can grab all of them. And then I'm going to tell it how I want to project. Now those other ones are basically like live, so that when I change box or cube or whatever, it's like live mapping it. So it could change from frame to frame. This is going to lock it in. Imagine we had a character, the character has a shirt with a picture on it. If we laid it out perfectly using planar or flat or something like that, it works good for a still, but the second that character turns, now the texture's gone, okay? So this, we need to make sure these are locked in, so that's why we're using these UVs. So I'm going to go through these and try to find the one that looks like it's going to lay it out the best. So I know, because of experience, sphere is not going to work, okay? Sphere basically takes a big 3D sphere and it's projecting that texture all the way around it, like it's wrapping this flat image and shooting it down. That's not a sphere shape, so that's not going to work. Cylinder is not going to work either because we get some stuff on the top that's kind of weird. We also get some stretching right here. It's kind of weird. Frontal could work. Frontal is basically wherever my camera is, that's where it's projecting it. So from this angle, that looks perfect. But then when I turn, well, now I'm getting these like weird shapes. Okay, so in this case, it's not going to work. Flat is just going to be one direction. You'll see how it fits it. Here's cubic. Here's cubic 2. Here's box. And here's shrink. For most of your items, box is going to be the best one to go to. It's the most universal. What it does is it finds everything that's facing like forward and it projects it that way. Everything that's facing left and right projects those. Everything that's facing back, everything's facing top. So you end up with UVs that are laid out pretty nice. Definitely not perfect, but good enough for what we're doing. Let's go back to cubic for a second. Is that cubic I want? Cubic 2. Okay, so look at cubic 2 and box. See how they're like two different ones here? So one of these is remembering what the original shape was. So this is basing it off of the original cube shape. Box is basing it off of the actual shape that it currently is. Okay. This is one of the things that's frustrating about cinemas is that it's very limiting as to how you can play with these. So a lot of times I'll just kind of go through and like maybe change this, maybe try that and see if I get better results. Maybe object, box, yeah. So I'm just gonna leave this at box. This is a pretty boxy shape. All right. Now what I need to do is I need to select these the shape here, and I need to create a texture that's going to fit perfectly inside this box. And where these faces are, I don't know if it's this one or that one, that's where I need to create my texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to, where's it at? No. And grab my edges, I think. That's that, yes. Layer, no. file. There we go. File, new texture. I'm going to make a brand new texture. I'm going to call this, I don't know, maybe this is Jurgens or something like that. I won't use the actual name. I'll use that, I'll change that over there, but just so I know what it is. Or I can call it Boxy Bottle. I want our width to be 4096. I want the height to be 4096. The resolution at 72 is fine. RGB, 8-bit, that's fine. And then for my color, I'm just going to leave this as black. There we go. So this creates a black texture. That's my base. And then I'm going to go into my layer, and I'm going to say outline polygons. And you'll see that I get a white outline on my polygons. Okay, so wherever I had edges selected or faces selected, it just creates an outline, and then I can save this as a TIFF, yes, and I will put it inside of my folder. So P drive 2510, product, textures, Boxy Bottle, TIFF, yes. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into Illustrator. Oops. I'm going to make a new document, and this is going to be pixels, 4096 by 4096. Orientation doesn't matter. I hit create. You can use Photoshop or Illustrator, it doesn't matter. If you're comfortable using InDesign, you could use that too. The end result has to be a TIFF image. That's what we're after, okay? So I basically need a flattened out image of what my texture is going to look like. I prefer using Illustrator just because of the shape tools that it has. That's what I want to use. There we go. Okay. I'm going to change my mode. My mode here is still set to CMYK. I thought I defaulted that to RGB. So I'll change it to RGB. I will place my picture inside here, so I'll go find that image. Product, textures, Boxy Bottle, there it is. And then I'm just going to click right here, and then that should fit my entire image. Okay. So here's where the layout of my texture or label is going to be. If I go into this, where's my layers? I can't use my hotkeys because of my recording software. There we go. I'm going to make a new layer here. I'm just going to lock this one. And I'm just going to outline where this is at, just so visually I can see exactly what the area is I'm working with. Okay, now if it's not this bottle, like let's say it's actually this side, that shouldn't be an issue for me to move it over to that one, but I'm pretty guaranteed it's this one because that's the only side we added those extra divisions or extra loops, okay? So that's what I'm working with. So I'm just going to turn off that bottom layer. And now I need to create a texture that's going to fit inside here. So imagine that I have a sticker that I need to build, lay out what this should look like. You do want to use reference. So Jurgens lotion label. You don't want to copy it directly, but you do want to get an idea of how they have their stuff laid out. So in this one, they have things like the net weight and the ounces and all that. So that's something I'm going to include in mine. So I'm going to go to my type tool, and I'm going to say 23 or 24.3 ounces. Let's make that bigger. There we go. Oh, who stretched that out? That wasn't me. Don't stretch your text out. Always use the font to change the size. There we go. That's like a weird number to do. But maybe I'll have a hidden code in there anyway. That'd be kind of neat. All right, fluid ounces and parentheses and then some sort of milliliters. And because I'm kind of anal about that, 718 milliliters. All right, now my drawing was a little bit off. You can see that the bottom of this is a little bit crooked. I don't know if my drawing was off. Yeah, it was, okay. So I'm just going to check that and scoot that down just a hair. I may need to go back and tweak and adjust or whatever, but that's fine. I just want to make sure my starting point is good. All right, so there's that. What else does this have? So that's the main thing that it has. It obviously has a name of there. We'll call this explosion. Explosion. I'll spell it like lotion. That sounds kind of neat. Explosion. There we go. Everyone's going to be banging on doors to get this one. Do something appropriate. It's easy to change the name after. That's not a big deal. But some people think it's funny to add, like, you know, weird names to things that are just not something you'd want to put in your demo reel. Let's do lowercase. Pick a good font. Actually, I think that's a fine font there. You don't want to do any text outlines. That's going to look weird. Maybe I'll have an ellipse or something here. I need to start picking some colors too, so let me just grab some swatches down here. There we go. So I'm going to pick a couple key colors. Let's see it on that bottle. Some of these bottles you'll actually see where they have like a little color swatch on it. I know on the back of the Pepsi bottles or Mountain Dew bottles, they typically do have like the little colors in there. I don't see it on either of those. Nope, get on that one. All right, so I'm going to pick some colors here, and these are ones I'm going to use throughout my stuff. So let's say that should be good. And then I'm going to base my other colors off of that one. So this one I'm going to go with a blue. So I'll take my hue over to blue. Jump the saturation like to 60. And let's do this. Actually, I think that might be good there, like that. And then maybe just a black, I think those colors should be good enough for now. We can tweak those after. So my label color will be this color. And then I'm going to have this circle, and that will be maybe this blue color. Now, I don't want the circle and the label to be like this, so I'm going to use my Shapemaker. If you've never used this before, you hit Shift-M, and you can basically just click on a piece, and now that piece is separated, and I can just delete those other pieces. Okay? And then I can just lower it so that now my text is on top. It looks like exploitation. I can't have that. That's so weird. It is, right? Cheap stuff. Cheap stuff. We'll come up with an actual name later. Cheap stuff works for now. And maybe I'll even take the cheap out of that. Oops. Right, we can do that. Put this here, put that there. Good, cheap stuff. Maybe I have some gradient or some kind of line work happening here, so let's go to my pen tool. Let's kind of meet this right about there. And this is by no means a label designing class, but I will tell you that the more time you spend on your label and the more time you make it look good, the better your product is going to look overall. I've seen some really nicely modeled products where the label just looks like trash, and it loses it. I'm going to go with the gold in this one. Oops, wrong one. There we go. And then I will use that Shapemaker again. Oops, I have to convert that first. There we go. Object, path, convert. There we go. So now, Shift-M, click that, and then I can delete that chunk. Okay, cheap stuff. There's typically some little catchphrase on here, the 25% more, all that stuff. I'm being kind of silly in this, but definitely don't be silly in yours. Yours is something that you want it to look like it's professional. If you make stuff that looks professional, even though it may not have been for an actual client, someone looking at your demo reel or your portfolio will actually think that it was stuff that you did professionally. Get rid of that. And then we'll have some other stuff here. Cause rashes. Cool. All right, so there's my startup label. Now, if I bring this in just like it is, Cinema will take that material and it'll drop it onto everything that's inside there, okay? So this is what that material would look like, is it would look like the label is here, and then everything else is going to be white except for these areas, okay? So let's just save this out so you can see that happen. In Illustrator, you can't just save as. I definitely want to save this as hand lotion or boxy one, whatever it's called. But then I also have to go and export. So I'll export this out as hand lotion TIFF. Yes, export. Okie dokie. All right, so now I'm going to go into Cinema. I'm going to switch back to my standard or startup, make a new material, drop it onto that, and then I'm going to load in that image. There is my hand lotion. Now you'll also notice going from Illustrator into a file, it automatically crops it. So I've lost that size that it originally was. And so there's my label not in the right place. So let me jump back to Illustrator again. I need to create a background. So I'm just going to make a background here. Make sure it fits perfectly. There we go. Move it to the background. And then whatever color I pick here, that's going to be the color of the bottle. So if I color it like this, the entire bottle should be this color, and then the label and stuff will just be right there. I also want to make sure that my dot here does not show up there. These are just for my reference. These are not actually part of any label that I would be utilizing. All right, so try that again. So let's go to export. Once you've done this a few times, the whole process will go a lot quicker. Yes, yes, yes. And then once it's set up, any changes you make will automatically update. So when this is done saving inside Illustrator, we should be able to go back to Cinema and it should fix this texture. We may have to hit reload or something, but it should fix it. Yep, let's go back in and just click on this and say reload. What? Product, textures, and lotion, there it is. Cool. And now we have our label in the right spot. Now it does look blurry. When I render it though, it should come in clear. All right, that's just how it shows it. Another thing I want to check is on my subdivisions. If I subdivide this, you may notice some distortion here. So again, that's something that we have to consider. Sometimes it's not terribly bad and you can utilize the lower resolution stuff as that. In this case, it's horrible. So I'm going to jump back to, actually I have to hit C first. There it is. Then jump back to my BP UV edit, grab all of my stuff, there it is, and then say box. You'll notice that it puts it pretty much in the same spot. It didn't alter it too much. Whoops, don't minimize that. Go back to my startup, click off, and there we go. I may need to tweak it a little bit. You can see that the line right here is actually like coming off of it. So it did alter it some, so I may want to take another snapshot of that. So let's go here, let's go back to BP UV edit. And this is why I did it originally, because sometimes it's hard to see exactly where that line is when you have it smoothed out so much. So we'll grab everything, we'll go to new texture from disk. Actually, let's go to new texture total. Let's say new boxy. And then I'll do my outline polygons. I'll do my save, yes. And then I'm just going to re-import that image into Illustrator and then just adjust where it's at. Hide this layer so I can see. There we go. All right, so now all the stuff that is right here, I just need to shuffle it over some so that it lines up perfectly. Now in this case, we can't get away with the lower resolution one because it's too low res. But it's not a huge deal because once we have this in place, now I can save it again. Oops, export it. Hand lotion, yes. Okie dokie. I didn't update yet. Sometimes it will update, and that's just not, it's not just me, it's just every time. Sometimes it works and sometimes it don't. All right, so it updated, but it's not still far enough over, so I still need to scoot that over some. So I could just grab all of my stuff, except the background and my color swatches. And then just maybe scoot it over, or I may need to resize it or whatever, okay? So for each one of my items, I'll need to do something like that. So there's my one bottle. I'll tweak the material later. I'll make sure that the reflections are right and everything once I get lighting. But for textures, that's it. So let's go to a different bottle like this one. And now this one here is rounded. Switching this off and switching this on, we will see a huge difference in how that checkerboard is going to lay out. All right, so that is, let's drop the checkerboard on this, and you'll be able to see, here is the checkerboard with the subdivision, here it is without. So you can see how right here, especially, it's stretching that texture out. Okay, so we know for this one that we are going to have to hit the C key on this and then lay out the UVs and then bring that into Photoshop or Illustrator. Okay, now with this one, just like the other one, we have to decide how we want this label laid out, where we want it laid out, and so forth. I'm going to do the same kind of setup, so I'm going to grab all the faces here. I can try box on this one, but you'll see the box is going to lay it out this piece, then this piece, then that piece, and that one. If I'm trying to lay a texture around this, so let's look at the Pepsi can. If I'm trying to lay this texture out like this, it's going to be very difficult to do because it's it would be cut up basically. So like part of the texture would be here, here, there, and there, and there'd be huge gaps. So for this one, maybe cylindrical would work. So that looks like it's pretty square in those areas. It's not perfect, we'll adjust it, but it's pretty close. Let me go to my transform. Can I do that? No, not that one. I'm going to go to my transform here and take my Y scale down. So I'm going to say 0.9. And then maybe 0.95. That's good. Okay, so that looks pretty square. So now I'm going to do the same thing. So new texture, round bottle, 4096, outline polygons, and then save texture, round bottle. Then I'll go into Illustrator. I'll either make a new document or use that same one. Especially if I have a theme going, if I have the same kind of design going from one to the other, I may just want to do everything in the same Illustrator file. There we go. So there's my bottle. This is where my label is going to be, right about here. Bless you. Okay, so that's where my label is going to be about. That should be good. I can see that. Maybe a little bit thicker. All right, cool. So then I would design my label. So if I'm using the same kind of stuff from here, I may want to grab all of this and just copy it, paste it into this one, and now I have a starting point basically. Keep in mind that something like this, we're only seeing basically less than a quarter of it. When you look at a container and you see it from head on, you're not seeing the sides of it really or the back of it. So as you design your label, even though you have all this room, if I were to put even cheap stuff, if I put the word cheap stuff here, like that, and I took stuff, come on, get out of the way, cheap, there we go, stuff, okay, that's going to wrap itself all the way around the bottle and it's not going to work. Oops, I need to export. Like, where is that my tools at? I'm also going to say use Artboard so I get the whole thing. Round bottle, texture, RGB, okie dokie. The Artboard is basically this, so instead of me creating a square that fits exactly that, I can use the Artboard as well. Multiple ways to do things. All right. While that's saving, I'm going to jump back to Cinema. I'm going to make a new material, drag it onto the cylinder, and then just assign that material. Round bottle, texture. Turn off reflectance for now. There we go. So now you see it says cheap stuff, and it wraps all the way around. So I wouldn't want that. Obviously, I would want my label to be basically in this small area. So for something like this, you may have to play with it a little bit to get it perfectly lined up with what you want. Right? So this label may actually be, let me hit undo on these. It may be this exact size. So I'm going to take, let me just delete that. I don't need that. Delete that. I'm going to make this shape here, and I'm going to make it, oops, I didn't grab my colors. There we go. I guess I can just throw these off the sideboard here. I'm going to take this, I'm going to eyedrop that on it. And then obviously I would change the sizing here, so this is, let's say, 12.2. And this would be 359. If I want the cap to be a different color, oops. So the cap up here is, I'm pretending that that's the actual cap that's attached to it. I would just grab a new rectangle, give that a color like black, that works, and then I will export this out. So this is where it's a little bit tricky and different because obviously you're not used to, working in this way where you're working in 2D, but then we're switching it over to 3D to get it to lay out correctly. So it may take you a day or two to do your first label. So obviously you want to make sure that you're not waiting until the last minute to do these. All right, so now we'll wait. I think it should be done. Nope, it's still thinking. There we go. So now we'll reload the image. Come on. He doesn't want to reload today, so we'll just manually do it. There we go. So now I can see where that label is right here in the middle where it says cheap stuff. Obviously it needs to be adjusted height-wise to fix all that. This label actually comes down to about there. And with this, I can pretty much see where that top of the bottle is going to be. If I look at where my divisions are, these areas here and there are these areas here and there. So as I start laying these things out, I need to make sure that they all line up together. It may help in some cases, like Photoshop's easy because you can just pick it from the list. But in this case, I'm going to grab that image, go to my properties, and then, where are you at? There we go. We can change the opacity of this. And that way I can see exactly where it's at so that I could line up. Okay, this black one needs to be about there in the middle of this. And this beige one needs to come up to about right there. And then this needs to come down all the way to the bottom. There we go. And then that, oops. You will also find it incredibly tricky to switch between Photoshop and Cinema at the same time. About there? No, that's not just too far, right there. Okay. And then maybe I can make this a bit bigger. Make that a bit bigger. Make this bigger. Okay. I'm just making these slightly bigger just so they are a bit more visible on the screen. There we go. Again, you'll spend more time on yours than I'm spending on mine. I just want you to see how this is going to be laid out. Oops. Use artboards, yes, click that. RGB. Oh, that's why, because it's CMYK. I'm like, why does it keep defaulting? So if it's something that you're going to be dropping an image on, it has to have the UVs laid out. Something like the cap, if it's just a cap as a separate item, you can just apply a material to it and give it a color. Like this doesn't need the UVs laid out because it's just a solid item, it's just a solid color. This is also probably a solid color, but this, because it has that picture on there, it needs the UVs laid out. This is still thinking. Let me make sure my document setup is not huge. What size is this? Oh, that's right. Yep, there it is. So now you can see this lines up pretty close. Like this 25% less, it's almost on that edge. I just need to scoot it maybe down a little bit. This swoosh happens straight across it. And then my other thing is right there. Okay, so that works out pretty good. Okay, so anything like these, you wouldn't need a UV layout. You wouldn't need to do anything fancy. You can just drop a material on them, give them a color, so this is black or whatever. If it's something like this, obviously we need the material, we need that color, that label on there. And that goes through all the other ones too. Product. So each one of these bottles here have that same thing. On these ones, I have a couple things going on. So one, I have this glass bottle, which is just a glass bottle. And if I scoot that aside, you'll see that that's all it is, just a glass bottle. And what I did was, instead of having to lay out the UVs for the entire thing and trying to deal with that because I had glass, which is a bit more tricky, I duplicated it. I'll duplicate it again. And then I went through and grabbed the faces, and I just deleted the faces that were not part of the label area. Oops, where are we at? This. There it is. So I'm going to grab all the faces here, not you. There we go. And I deleted those faces, and now basically I had this, which I used as a label, that I could just focus on the UVs for that, so I had a label that would be this. Right? So now I'm not UV laying the whole thing, I'm just UV laying that. The same thing for the top of these. If I just wanted, let's say, a label on the top of this, I could grab these faces here. Let me switch this to this other mode. So let's say I want to have a label that sits inside this. Don't create caps. Just scoot down. There you go. I could take these faces here. I'm going to duplicate this so I can see it. And I'm going to invert my selection, delete. And then I can focus on my label that I would just stick literally right on top of that. Okay? So some cases you can do these little tricks. Some cases, for like my other bottles, it makes more sense to do it all in one. This one here, I have a couple things going on. Where are you at? Right there, right there. Okay. So this one I have, what's that hotkey? Just want to disable that. All right, well, whatever. I have a wood texture, which is this. Okay, and that's like what gets wrapped around the entire thing. And then I grab the faces individually around this stripe, and I assign this blue one, so I would have that blue stripe going around. And then I made another material that's just this wood label. Okay, again, another option depending on how you want to set things up. Now this is a ping that I built inside Photoshop that is just that. It's just a these lines here with the text. Edit image. Okay, so it's just the lines and the text on a transparent background that I saved as a ping. And then when I drop that onto this item, I'm able to use the texture placement on this and basically just move around where I want that to be. So now again, another way we could have a label on top of something is like this, where it's actually like interacting with that environment. If I had this kind of thing on these bottles, the same thing. Like some nail polishes, I think, they have like transparent labels on things. Juices have them too and other things, but I've seen it a lot on nail polishes just because they want you to see the color. So something like this, that may not be like an actual like wrapped label, that may be just like a transparent label with the text on top of it. If that's the case, that's how I would do the text. I would just make a document that's 4,000 pixels, make sure the background's transparent, make sure I can see the stuff I want to see, and then when I bring it in, I have glass, and then I have this wrapped on label. These are boring ones. There you go. There's another one like this, right? So that's just text that's just stuck on top of it. Yes, ma'am. To look like it's wrapped around. Okay, so let's say, well, there's two things. So on this one, it's a separate item that's just on top of it. Okay, so if this is the glass, what I'm trying to do with that, I'm going to take this. Okay, so this is just a glass material that I created. It has transparency on it, just like we did with like the suckers and stuff inside the candy world. And I dropped it on there, and then I made another material that has the color set to be the label. I have a bump also set the label, just so there's a little bit of depth to it. And then on alpha, I also loaded the label, but I did it as a black and white. If I don't have this on here, that's what it's going to look like, a solid piece. When I put that on, it wraps it around. Okay? And then I can just drop this onto the bottle. Where are you at, bottle? Thanks. Drop it down here. There it is. And then you can see how that label is on top of it. So then I need to pick how it's going to be laid out. So I'm going to click on that. In this case, I'm going to choose cylindrical. And then I'm going to go to this. And this item allows you to choose how that texture is getting placed specifically on that item. Something simple like a cylinder, no problem doing it this way. Something else where we want to actually go into another software, we have to do the UV layout. So now with this, I'm going to go to my scale tool, where are you at, and scale you down. There it is. I'm going to scale it down, down this way. It's actually backwards. It's like up is one way and down is the other way. Okay, and now you can see the label that's on there. It's not fitting perfectly because it wasn't really meant for this. Oops. There we go. Now I could also go into this and make sure that I don't tile it. By tiling it, it's like repeating it. So as one part is projected, it's then projecting it again and again. So I turn tile off, and then I only have one copy on there. So then I can rotate it to get it where I would need this to be. And for some reason it's backwards. Maybe I negative scaled this or something. Tile texture, projection. Yeah, I'm not sure how it got backwards, but it's backwards. Oh, wait, there it is. Under tiles U, it was negative. So now it should be placed correctly. All right. So I will scale this down a little bit more, move it down a little bit more, and then just deselect all my stuff. So now you can see that that label is now on the glass. So it's actually like a separate piece that's on there. And then when this renders, oops. Yes, that's fine. When it renders, we should see that glass texture and then this other texture in just in those spots. Like it's a completely different thing. So you can think of it like if I had a piece of glass and then I painted like a blue stripe on it with paint, those are two different textures that are happening. Cool. Mm-hmm. What's the name of it? That's wrong. That's it there, though. Yep. So for something like this, because of where that label is at, oh, come on. This one here. Yep, so that would be the same thing. So you would just have a glass material, and then you would have a picture of what you want to be projected. And if this is wrapped at all, I would want to do a cylindrical projection. If it's flat, like maybe it's more of like a squarish bottle, then you could do something, let's say, flat or, you wouldn't do frontal, it would be flat or box. But yeah, it would be the same thing. You just have two different images. One image, the image would just be that transparent label like this. Okay? All right, so that should get you through all of your texturing that you would have for this type of scenario. We'll have another lecture next week where I go through and do the rendering out of this. So how we do a turntable, how we do the lighting for this, how we adjust our materials. We're going to try to go for more of a realistic scene. So we want to make sure that we have everything looking proper and appropriate, because it's very easy not to get that. Any questions on the texturing stuff before I proceed?